I tied a length of blue ribbon around the handle of my lunch basket that October morning. The same particular shade I had worn in my hair the one time Wyatt Calloway had ever complimented anything about my appearance directly.
Aren't these baskets
And I want to
just
tell you
beautiful?
honestly that I spent
I hope our
considerably
basket wins a
more
prize
thought on
today.
that ribbon than
Welcome
I spent
everyone
on the
to our
fried
annual
chicken and apple
social.
pie underneath it. Hoping past all good sense that a man who noticed almost nothing out loud might notice that. I had packed that basket the night before with the particular care a young woman gives a thing she has decided privately matters considerably more than its practical purpose suggests. A whole roasted chicken instead of the usual fried pieces. A jar of peach, preserves I'd put up myself that summer specifically with an eye toward this exact October. A lattice-topped pie I'd practiced twice before finally judging worthy of the occasion. My mother had watched me fuss over that basket's presentation with the particular knowing amusement of a woman who had clearly noticed considerably more about my private hopes than I had ever once admitted to her directly. Our church held its basket social every October, the Saturday closest to the harvest moon, raising money toward the new schoolhouse the congregation had been slowly saving to build for 3 years running. And the custom worked plain enough for anyone new to the territory to understand within a single telling. Every unmarried woman packed a basket lunch, decorated however she pleased, and the bachelors of the county bid against each other for the right to share that meal with whoever had made it. The baskets themselves supposedly anonymous, though every soul present understood. By the third bid or so, exactly whose basket was climbing and why, the money went straight into the building fund, which meant a spirited bidding war was considered a public virtue rather than an embarrassment. And I had learned, over my 2 previous Octobers old enough to participate properly, that a basket's final price said considerably more about the county's opinion of a young woman than any single compliment ever could. Daniel Calloway had won my basket both of those previous Octobers, and I want to be fair in saying he had never once behaved badly about it. Courteous and pleasant company across 2 entire shared lunches, the son of the county's most prosperous rancher, and possessed of exactly the kind of easy, unworried confidence that comes standard, with never once having had to count a dollar carefully before spending it. He was sandy-haired and quick to smile, well-liked around town for a genuine warmth that had nothing calculated about it at all. And I want to be clear that my growing preference for another man was never once a judgment against Daniel's actual character, only a simple, stubborn fact of my own heart that no amount of pleasant company across 2 lunches had ever managed to redirect. He bid the way he did most things, cheerfully and without apparent strain, and I had spent both of those lunches genuinely enjoying his company while some separate. More honest part of myself watched the crowd for a particular dark-haired ranch hand, who never once raised his own hand to bid at all, standing instead near the back fence with his hat pulled low, watching the whole proceeding with an expression I had spent 2 years trying and failing to properly read. Wyatt Calloway. No relation to Daniel, despite the coincidence of surname that had confused half the county at some point or another. Worked for wages on the Hendricks spread 3 miles out from town. $30 a month, same as any competent hand earned in that stretch of Wyoming territory. Money that had to stretch across his own keep and whatever he sent home each season to a widowed mother and 2 younger brothers back in Missouri, who depended on it considerably more than his own comfort ever did. He had come west at 17, I learned eventually. The same year his father died of a fever that took half that particular Missouri county besides. Old enough by local reckoning to be considered a man and responsible ever since, for a family that had no other reliable source of income beyond whatever he could send home from whatever outfit would hire him. I had watched him work a full season of brandings and roundups with a quiet competence that the other hands respected without needing to say so aloud. The particular steady reliability of a man who had learned early that a family depending on his wages left no room whatsoever for carelessness, and I had exchanged with him, across 2 years of church socials and market days, perhaps 100 words total, each one delivered with the particular careful economy of a man who clearly felt considerably more than he ever let himself say plainly. I learned, considerably later than I should have, exactly what those 2 years of silence had actually been costing him to maintain. He told me himself, eventually, that he had started setting aside a portion of his wages the very week after Daniel first won my basket, $1 here and $2 there, tucked into a tin box he kept hidden beneath a loose board in the bunkhouse floor. Not with any clear plan attached to the saving at first. Simply the particular instinct of a man who understood, watching another fellow win something he wanted with money. He barely had to think about spending. That he would need considerably more than good intentions if he ever meant to compete properly. He described counting that tin box's contents some evenings by lamplight after the other hands had gone to sleep. A private ritual he'd never once mentioned to anyone. The particular satisfaction of watching a small sum grow slowly towards something he still wasn't entirely certain. That first year, he would ever actually have the nerve to spend the way he'd started imagining he might. Man can't out-charm somebody who's never once had to worry about charm mattering, he told me, on account of money doing the worrying for him instead. Only thing I had to work with was patience, and I decided patience might as well save towards something specific, instead of just waiting around hoping the arithmetic changed on its own. The 1st October, the one before I understood any of this, I had watched Daniel's opening bid climb from $2 to nearly $6 before the auctioneer. Old Mr. Pruitt, who ran the feed store and called the bidding every year with the same theatrical relish, finally brought his hammer down, and I remember scanning the crowd afterward for any sign that the price had troubled anyone in particular, finding only Wyatt's carefully blank expression near the back fence, giving away nothing at all. I had been 17 that first year, new enough to the whole custom that I hadn't yet learned to read the crowd's particular rhythms. The way certain families' sons always bid on certain families' daughters as a matter of established habit, rather than genuine competition. The way a truly contested basket drew the whole congregation's attention, in a manner an uncontested one never quite managed. Mine that first year had drawn only Daniel's steady, unhurried bidding against 2 other half-hearted offers that dropped away within the first minute. And I remember feeling at 17, a small disappointment I hadn't yet understood the actual shape of. I ate that lunch with Daniel under the cottonwood at the edge of the churchyard. Pleasant conversation about cattle prices in the coming winter, and I remember glancing twice toward that same fence line to find Wyatt gone entirely, having apparently decided the whole spectacle wasn't worth watching through to its conclusion. The 2nd October went considerably the same way. Daniel's bid climbing even higher that year, nearly $9 by the time Mr. Pruitt's hammer fell. And I want to be honest that some part of me had begun, by that second lunch, actively hoping some other bidder might challenge the outcome properly. Not out of any real dislike for Daniel's company, but out of a growing, uncomfortable awareness that I was spending my one guaranteed public afternoon each October with a man I liked considerably less than the one who never once raised his hand at all. I had noticed that second year, watching Wyatt from across the churchyard while Daniel's bid climbed uncontested, a particular tightness around his jaw that hadn't been there the year before, a man visibly holding something in check that the 1st October's careful blankness had managed to disguise more completely. I asked Daniel directly that second lunch whether he genuinely enjoyed these socials or simply enjoyed winning them, and he'd laughed, easy and unbothered, and told me honestly that he'd never much considered the difference, having grown up in a household where winning things simply happened as a matter of course, rather than a question requiring examination. It was near Christmas of that second year that I finally worked up the nerve to ask Wyatt directly, at the little gathering the church held for the holiday, why he never once bid on any basket at all, mine or anyone else's. The gathering was small and warmly lit, evergreen boughs strung along the church windows and a fire built up high in the pot-belly stove. And I found him standing somewhat apart from the main cluster of conversation the way he generally did at such things. And I want to admit that it took considerable nerve on my part simply to cross that room and ask him a question I had been turning over privately for the better part of 2 months. He was quiet a long moment before answering, turning his hat slowly in his hands the particular way I had come to recognize as him weighing a truth against however much of it he actually intended to say out loud. "Bidding on a basket costs considerably more than the dollar figure suggests," he said finally. "When a man's got exactly enough saved to cover his mother's winter coal, and nothing whatsoever left over for foolishness. I'd sooner watch from the fence than bid low enough to lose in front of the whole county and prove out loud what everybody already assumes about a hired hand's prospects." I did not have a ready answer for that particular honesty, Though I understood, walking home that evening with my own breath fogging pale in the cold air, that I had just learned considerably more about the actual weight of 2 years of silence than 100 careful words exchanged at church socials had ever managed to teach me. I did not know, that Christmas, that Wyatt had already been saving specifically toward this coming October by then. The tin box beneath the bunkhouse floorboard slowly filling with wages he could have spent on considerably more sensible things. A new saddle blanket, a proper winter coat of his own instead of the patched one he'd been making do with for 2 seasons running. He told me considerably later that he had done the arithmetic carefully that winter, working out exactly how many months of careful saving it would take to have, by the following October, an amount that could plausibly outbid whatever Daniel's easy family money might casually offer. Sitting up some nights by lamplight, with a stub of pencil figuring and refiguring the sums until the numbers finally satisfied him. He had asked one of the older hands discreetly, roughly what the Calloway family's typical spending habits ran to, gathering intelligence the way a careful general might before committing to a campaign he could not afford to lose, and the particular humiliation of potentially losing anyway. After all that careful saving, had very nearly talked him out of the whole plan more than once that spring. He confessed, too, that he had nearly spent the whole sum that April on a proper saddle when his old one finally gave out beyond repair, riding a borrowed one for 2 full months instead specifically to keep the tin box's total intact, a sacrifice he'd never once mentioned to anyone at the time. I tied that blue ribbon around my basket handle the morning of the 3rd October, fully understanding, for the first time in 3 years of participating in this particular tradition, that I had a genuine preference regarding how that afternoon's bidding ought to conclude, and no reliable way whatsoever of influencing the outcome beyond a small scrap of ribbon and whatever hope I could invest in a man noticing it. My mother, helping me pack the basket that morning, asked whether I intended the ribbon as any particular signal, and I told her honestly that I hoped so, without any real confidence the hoping would matter. And she only smiled the particular knowing smile of a woman who had clearly been watching my private hopes unfold across 2 previous Octobers with more attention than I'd ever given her credit for. The churchyard filled the usual way that afternoon, long tables set with baskets decorated in every manner of ribbon and cloth a young woman's imagination could produce. Mr. Pruitt already testing his auctioneer's voice against the crisp October air, wagon after wagon, rolling in from the surrounding ranches and homesteads, until the churchyard held, by early afternoon, nearly the whole of the county's unmarried population, and considerably more than half its married one besides. Everyone turned out in their good clothes for what had become, over the years, as much a community celebration as a simple fundraiser. I found myself scanning the gathering crowd for Wyatt's particular shape with a nervousness that had nothing whatsoever to do with the ordinary business of a church social. Mr. Pruitt called my basket 3rd that year, holding it aloft with the same practiced theatrical flourish he brought to every basket regardless of its actual contents. And Daniel's opening bid came exactly as it always had, easy and unhurried. $2 offered with the particular confidence of a man who had never once needed to consider losing. I watched the crowd's attention settle into its familiar rhythm, expecting the usual climb toward whatever figure Daniel judged sufficient that particular year, when a voice I recognized instantly, though I had rarely heard it raised loud enough to carry across a crowded churchyard, called out a bid that stopped Mr. Pruitt's practiced patter cold for 1 full startled second before he recovered his auctioneer's composure. Wyatt had walked up from the back fence, while my attention was fixed on the basket itself, and he stood now considerably closer to the front of the crowd than I had ever once seen him position himself at any previous social, hat still on his head rather than held nervously in his hands. An expression on his face I had genuinely never witnessed there before, something that looked considerably more like determination than the careful reticence I'd grown accustomed to reading in him. I noticed several of the other ranch hands he worked alongside exchanged surprised glances at his sudden repositioning, clearly as unprepared for this particular development as the rest of the congregation, and I caught sight of one of them, a weathered older cowhand named Sully, grinning broadly and elbowing his neighbor as though he'd just watched a horse he'd bet on unexpectedly pull ahead in a close race. Daniel, visibly startled by competition he had apparently never once expected to face, raised his own bid without much apparent concern, and Wyatt matched it and raised it again. And I watched the crowd's ordinary social chatter fall away, entirely into the particular hushed attention a small town gives to genuinely unexpected drama unfolding in real time. The bidding climbed past $10, past the previous year's record, and I watched Daniel's easy confidence begin. For the first time in 3 years I had known him to show real strain, glancing toward his own father standing nearby with an expression that suggested he was recalculating in real time exactly how much this particular contest was actually worth to him. His father, I noticed, offered no particular encouragement either way, simply watching the proceedings with the mild, interested amusement of a wealthy man observing a contest he had no real stake in personally. Wyatt did not glance toward anyone for reassurance at all, matching each of Daniel's bids with a steadiness that told me plainly he had already decided, whatever the final figure turned out to be, that he did not intend to be the one who blinked first. The crowd's murmuring had grown considerably by that point, whispered speculation passing rapidly from one cluster of onlookers to the next, and I caught snatches of it despite myself. Someone's mother remarking that she'd never once seen a hired hand bid against Daniel Calloway on anything. Someone's father wondering aloud whether the Hendricks boy actually had that kind of money saved at all. Mr. Pruitt, thoroughly enjoying himself by this point, called the numbers with theatrical relish, the whole churchyard now fully attentive, and I stood beside my own basket with my hands clasped tight enough to ache, understanding that I was watching 2 years of careful, silent saving finally spend itself in the single most public arithmetic that small Wyoming town had witnessed in considerable memory. It was at $18, a full 3 months of Wyatt's wages by his own careful count, that Daniel finally shook his head, quiet and genuinely gracious about it despite what must have been real surprise, and told Mr. Pruitt plainly that the honor belonged to whoever wanted it considerably more than he apparently did. A murmur of genuine astonishment moved through the churchyard at that particular figure, considerably beyond any basket's price in the social's recorded history, and I heard someone behind me remark that they'd have to record it properly in the church, ledger alongside the building fund's other notable contributions. Mr. Pruitt's hammer came down with a flourish that drew genuine applause from half the assembled congregation, several of the older ranch hands whooping outright in a manner that would ordinarily have drawn a stern look from the more proper church-going ladies present, though even they seemed that particular afternoon too caught up in the drama to mind the noise. I watched Wyatt cross that churchyard toward me with a particular unhurried steadiness that reminded me, absurdly, of watching a man approach a spooked horse he had already decided he would eventually gentle, patient and certain despite whatever nerves the approach itself might actually be costing him. He took the basket from my hands with a formality that made me want to laugh and cry in roughly equal measure, and told me, quiet enough, that only I could hear it over the churchyard's continuing buzz of commentary, that he had spent 8 months saving $18 specifically to prove something to himself he'd apparently needed proving considerably more than he'd needed the actual lunch. Wanted to know, he said, whether a hired hand's careful patience could ever actually beat money that never had to work for anything. Turns out the answer was never really about the money at all. It was just about finally being willing to risk losing in front of the whole county, instead of just watching safely from the fence. We ate that lunch beneath the same cottonwood where I had shared 2 previous Octobers with Daniel, though I want to tell you honestly, that conversation flowed between Wyatt and me that particular afternoon with a warmth and ease that 2 years of careful 100-word exchanges had never once managed to produce, as though $18 of genuine risk had somehow unlocked considerably more conversation than any amount of comfortable safety ever could. He told me about his mother and his younger brothers back in Missouri, about the particular satisfaction of watching a green colt finally accept a saddle after weeks of patient work, about the tin box beneath the bunkhouse floorboard and the specific arithmetic of 8 months careful saving, and I found myself understanding, listening to him talk more in a single afternoon than in 2 previous years combined, that his reticence had never once been coldness at all, simply a man's particular caution about spending words he couldn't easily take back once offered. He asked me questions too, careful and genuinely curious ones, about my own family and the particular satisfaction I took in baking, about whether I'd ever wanted to leave the territory, or whether this particular stretch of Wyoming had always felt sufficiently like home. And I found myself answering at a length and with a candor that surprised even me. 2 years of careful reserve dissolving, somewhere over the course of that single shared lunch, into something considerably closer to the easy familiarity I'd always privately wished our brief exchanges might someday become. Daniel found us both before the afternoon properly ended and told us, with a graciousness that considerably raised my opinion of him even in the moment of losing to a rival, that he genuinely never once considered, across 2 easy years of winning, that the bidding itself might mean something entirely different to a man for whom $18 represented considerably more than mere competitive pride. He sat with us a while under that same cottonwood, his own earlier disappointment apparently already settling into something closer to genuine curiosity, asking Wyatt plain questions about the Hendricks operation and about ranch work generally with an interest that struck me as entirely sincere rather than merely polite. "I believe I owe you both an apology," he said eventually, "for treating something considerably more serious than I understood as simple sport for 2 years running. Watching a man risk that much plainly for something he actually wanted taught me more today about what these socials are actually meant to mean than either of my own 2 winning bids ever managed to teach me myself." He shook Wyatt's hand with genuine warmth rather than any strained courtesy, and I watched something settle between the 2 men that afternoon that looked considerably more like mutual respect than the quiet rivalry 3 years of basket socials had built up between them. Wyatt and I married the following June, once he'd saved toward a small parcel of his own rather than simply working another man's wages indefinitely. A modest spread bordering the Hendricks land that old man Hendricks himself, impressed by the same steady patience I'd come to love, had helped him arrange favorable terms toward purchasing. I still have that tin box, empty now of its careful savings, but kept on our own mantel as a particular reminder of exactly what 8 months of silent, patient risk had actually purchased, and I have caught Wyatt himself more than once over the years since, running his thumb absently along its worn edge while telling some visitor the story of how it came to sit there. Daniel stood as a witness at our wedding, genuinely pleased rather than merely dutiful about the role, and married a rancher's daughter from the next county over himself the following spring. And I have come to think that whatever that particular October cost him in wounded pride, he gained something worth considerably more in the friendship that grew between our 2 families in all the years since. The church finished its new schoolhouse the following spring, built in no small part on the strength of one particularly memorable October's bidding, $18 alone accounting for nearly a fifth of that whole year's building fund. And I have told our own children, gathered now around that same empty tin box on our mantel, that the most valuable thing their father ever purchased at auction cost him 8 months of patient saving and considerably more courage than the $18 alone could ever properly account for. I still tie a length of blue ribbon around every basket I pack for that social each October, though I no longer need it to signal anything at all. Some habits simply become the shape of gratitude once the waiting they were built for has finally, properly ended.